Thank you, guys. That's what we're always seeking, to see the Christ in one another, to experience the Christ in one another. And in so doing, we are able to commune, if you would, with Spirit. When I was thinking about this service and how to kind of tie it all together and explain it in such a way that we don't misunderstand, maybe because of our past, what this means, at least from my perspective, and to share with you this idea of communion. And so I went to the place that we should always go when we want to know what something means, and that is the dictionary online. And it has two definitions for communion. One is celebrating the Last Supper, the Lord's Supper, however they call it. And then the second is the one that I really appreciate. It's the sharing or exchanging of intimate thoughts and feelings which are exchanged on a mental or emotional or spiritual level. Isn't that beautiful? And, of course, my mind darts all over the place. But for me, it went back to when I was a kid. When I thought about, what does this mean to me? And when I was a young child, and I still remember it, one thing my family did a lot of, and as a child, it seems to me we were together every weekend, but we weren't really. But we were together a lot during the summertime in particular, and our thing for family was to go to Yorktown. Now, I'm talking about my grandmother, my grandfather, my other grandfather. I'm talking about the whole family, aunts, uncles, everybody. And we would go to Yorktown, and we would find, in that shady grove near the beach, we'd get there early, and we'd find a picnic area, and we would bring 2 or 3 benches together and kind of take the place over. That's how I remember it. But I remember the fun we had. I remember the intimacy. I remember my uncle who would help clean up. Yeah, even in that day. Man was cleaning up. And the reason he did it is because he wanted to get the table empty so he could go to sleep and take his nap on top of the table. See, so he had a reason. And people would walk by and look at him like, what a strange guy. And there he was, and he brought his pillow with him so he could be comfortable. One of the unique things that happened in my family. The other thing that would happen is we were a family that in our meals shared with each other. It just was part of our nature, if you would, or way we did things. We had communion together, if you would. And I remember some picnics times where we talked about a situation in the family. An uncle who was unemployed and what might be able to do to help and support. Somebody in the family who was angry with somebody, and that even talk about how to resolve that. Okay? So it was an open family. It was a family who communed together. And in remembering that, I really kind of see communion, if you would, as that ability to commune together. I see us as a community that communes together. What we'll be celebrating today is the idea that you and I are in communion together when we share our relationships, when we share our lives, when we support one another, when we step forward. As I read the scripture in Matthew about the Lord's Supper, it said in the beginning that, remember, that in the days of the feast of the unleavened bread, and I stopped for a second because I had to remember what that was. And it's not Passover. Passover is a day at the end of the week, the Sabbath. What the Feast of the Unleavened Bread is, as it says in Deuteronomy, Moses said to the people, so this day shall be to you a memorial, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord throughout all generations. You shall keep it, there we go, you shall keep it as a feast by an everlasting ordinance. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove the leaven from your houses. And for whoever eats leavened bread from the first day until the 7th day, that person is abiding with the Lord. Now, what that memorial was, what is being celebrated in the first 7 days, in the first 5 days actually, is the idea that the children of Egypt traveled to the Red Sea. Now, I always thought kind of, even as an adult, that they kind of went out of the town of Egypt, they went outside the gates, and then they walked over to the Red Sea. And that all took about maybe a couple hours. When the truth is, it really took 5 days to get to the Red Sea. And as you know, Pharaoh's forces were coming down on the children of God, and a wall of fire took place. And then they took 2 days to cross the Red Sea. Now, they took 2 days to cross the Red Sea, my guess is because they were afraid. They didn't see a way. They weren't in communion, if you would, at that time. And what happened is that the second day, the sea parted. And the reason the sea parted is because they had the faith that if they stepped into the sea, it would part. They had the faith that their journey would allow whatever obstacles, and that's what the Red Sea symbolizes, that were in their way, could be parted, could be removed as they moved into their journey from exile or from slavery into freedom. And so what happens is that this journey by Moses leading the children out of Israel has always been your journey and my journey. It's always a journey of being in slavery or in bondage to the world, to ourselves, to maybe issues that have taken place in our lives, family issues, friendship issues, work issues, any kind of relationship. And so it's this opportunity for you and I to move out of bondage. Emily Cady, in her book Lessons in Truth, the first chapter is From Bondage to Freedom. That's what we're all about, moving from bondage to freedom. And we do that through the power of communing with one another, of being in oneness, of understanding and awakening to the power that God is within each of us. There was another person who took a journey about 2,000 years ago. We don't know much about his childhood, but he came from Nazareth. We don't know much about his training or his background, because we only know of one incident when he was 12 years old where he went to the temple and talked with the scribes and the Pharisees. And yet, at the same time, at about age 30, he came into his ministry. And that's what we really know about, is his ministry. Because of what he believed, because of his consciousness, which was so far ahead of the world, and still is for much of the world, he brought into thought some statements of truth that upset people. When somebody disagrees with us, we get upset about it. And if it's somebody with authority, they can, if they really get angry enough, try to get even. And so the journey that Jesus took was a journey of the hero's journey, of awakening to the Christ within himself, to God within himself, the Father, he called it. And opening up to that, and then teaching each and every person they could do the same thing. That was the real heresy. That was the real challenge. That was the difficult part of the journey. And this can happen from time to time when we disagree. When we're ahead of time in consciousness, then people try to snuff the consciousness out. And so they crucified Jesus. But the consciousness could not be snuffed out. Evolution does not allow that. Spiritual evolution does not allow that. Because once you have an idea, once a group of people have an idea that is powerful and truth, it explodes and it grows. And as it does that, we are able to step again into our journey. And our journey, just like Jesus' journey, is to let others see God in us. Is to be expressions of that unconditional love. Is to be an expression of forgiveness. To be an expression of non-judgmental. To be an expression of non-violence. To be an expression of all the good and all the potential that lies within us that we can utilize through the Christ consciousness. And so Jesus took the journey. The other thing that comes to my mind is that what Jesus was teaching us is that no matter who you are, if you look for God, if you seek God, you will find God. Let me give you an example. There was a rabbi. He'd been a rabbi for a number of years. He was considered to be a very good rabbi. He cared for his people. He did the things he was supposed to do to be a rabbi. And yet this rabbi was troubled because he didn't feel like he experienced God. Oh, he could talk about God. He could point out God in the Torah and in Hebrew Scripture. He could do all those things. He was an expert in that field, but he didn't experience and feel and know God. Some of us might feel that way from time to time. So what this rabbi started to do, which is natural, was he started to pray. And he would pray, God, reveal yourself to me. And nothing happened. I mean, he didn't have, a wonderful vision. He didn't have a shock that took place. Nothing happened. He just kept praying, God, reveal yourself. Finally, he said, well, I think it's really important that as he read Elijah, that I do as Elijah did. I better be quieten down. And so he stopped talking to God, and he tried to listen to God. Because before that, he, like Elijah, you see, was looking for God outside of himself. He was looking for God in the storm. He was looking for God in the wind. He was looking for God in the lightning. He was looking for God in the fire. It wasn't until Elijah got quiet and withdrew to the cave within that he was able to find God, the still small voice of God. So the rabbi said, well, if it's good enough for Elijah, it must be good enough for me. And he started to do that. He withdrew within himself. And after a few sessions, what happened, without begging God, is that he came out of meditation one morning and he felt, as he said for the first time, the unconditional, powerful love of God. And he said, I knew God wasn't a he. And I knew God wasn't a she. And I knew God wasn't an it. But what I found out was that God is unconditional love. And he said there was a warmth that went through his body as he understood that, as he felt that, as he experienced that. And that warmth was the Spirit of God moving in and through him. And he says that he really became an authentic rabbi when he came to understand and know that. Because you see, he was awakening, he was communicating with God. He was seeking and he was able to find. Consider the power of what happens when we come together in oneness. Consider the power of what happens when we come together to commune together. Consider the fact that when we step forward, that we can choose to release our baggage, to release any resentment, any judgment, anything I need to forgive. We can do that in this moment, this morning, as we come forward and commune together. Our interpretation of unity is that the bread represents the bread of life, represents prosperity overall. I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about prosperity in spirit, prosperity emotionally, the freedom that we find as we move from bondage into freedom. And then the wine represents blood from the standpoint of life itself. I mean, if you don't have any blood flowing through you, you've got a problem. All right? Just know that. And so we have this blood that represents life itself. And that's the way we interpret it in unity. The other thing we feel in unity is that everybody is welcome at this altar. And that each person is nourished when they come forward. And their nourishment comes because we do it together as a community. We come to the altar, you see, with our diversity, with our inclusiveness, black and white, rich and poor, gay and straight, immigrant and native born. Those who've made mistakes and are looking for a way of moving through those mistakes and liberating themselves. And what we trust and seek is the unity in the Christ, not the unity in unity. That's a nice slogan. But the unity is in the Christ consciousness, if you would, or in the consciousness of Jesus, or in the consciousness of Elijah. That's where it is. That's where we find it. And it's available through all faiths and all religions. And so anybody is welcome at this table this morning to participate with us as we go through this communion together. So I want to invite you to experience a time, if you would, of this spiritual communion as we literally celebrate our oneness and understand that which created us that's within us, no matter what you want to call it. There is a source from which we have come that really, when we open up, defines who we are as spiritual beings. And to understand that there is unlimited substance for you. Substance is energy. Science and religion both agree that there is never an end to energy. And so I call it God energy that's flowing in and through you and allowing you to see the good in yourself, to see and understand that spirit is absolutely perfect just the way it is, and it abides in you and with you. We're going to go into silence for a few moments. And as we do, I want you to hear these words and maybe take one of them with you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. That was Jesus Christ is speaking of abiding one with the other in spirit, in divine expression, divine idea, and divine mind. So abide in me. Gently close your eyes and just think. And you can say, awaken in me, abide in me, reveal through me. As I prepare myself for this time of communion with my fellow travelers. And as you come out of this short silence, just affirm to yourself, I am a spiritual being. Just think that. I am a spiritual being. I am having a spiritual experience in the human condition. Now, the second thing we can think about in preparing ourselves for communion is that not only do we center ourselves and prepare ourselves, we also look at ourselves from the standpoint of what do I need to forgive in myself? What do I need to release so that I feel the freedom? I feel the unlimited power of God within me. And most often we have to forgive ourselves because of thinking we have done something wrong or we didn't live up to the potential we thought we should live up to. And so as we go into this time of silence, just remember that Jesus said, And you can say to yourself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I feel that and I sense that when I let go of anything in the past that holds me back from my freedom. Now, as we come out of this time of silence, I want to offer you this opportunity to come forward. And as you do, a couple of instructions. We have bread and we have juice. Please dip the bread in the juice, okay? If you would, please, when you come forward. Also, we have a table that is gluten-free, which Peggy represents, okay? And so if you want to be gluten-free, this is the table that you go to my right. Otherwise, you can go anywhere your heart leads you in the next few moments. And also, I do want to commemorate something as communion today. It's kind of unusual, I know. But a friend of mine passed away this week. Most of you know him, Giulio Del Corso, unexpectedly. And anyway, Marion's doing overall well. It was totally unexpected. He was watching In the Heat of the Night, which is one of his favorite programs to revisit. So I just want to remember him as we do this too, just in memory of he and his family and loving them. And we are communing, if you would, with Spirit itself as we think about Giulio. And so at this time, as the music starts, please feel free to come forward as you are led.